The night was colder than usual in Las Vegas, but inside the Grand Arena, the heat of thousands of excited voices filled the air. Spotlights swept across the crowd like restless eyes, searching for the next big moment. For weeks, the buzz had been building about the charity exhibition match that was meant to draw attention to mental health awareness. People thought it would be just another show match, nothing too intense, just good publicity and a lot of smiles for the cameras. But when Jackson the Hammer Hayes stepped into the ring that night, the atmosphere changed in an instant. Jackson was the reigning UFC heavyweight champion. He was young, fast, ruthless, and proud of it. He had crushed every opponent who had dared to share the cage with him, and his swagger made him loved and hated in equal measure. To him, this charity fight was just another chance to show off. The audience didn't know the full story yet, but they were about to find out. As Jackson waited in the ring, bouncing on his heels, he suddenly grabbed the microphone from the announcer's hand. The speakers crackled as he spoke, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Ladies and gentlemen, I hear tonight I'm supposed to go easy on a Hollywood pretty boy. They told me to be gentle, to make it look good. But you know what? I don't play make-believe like some washed-up actor. I fight for real." He paused, scanning the crowd, soaking up the boos and cheers like fuel for his ego. "So Keanu Reeves, Mr. John Wick himself, if you're back there, I hope you know what you signed up for. Tonight, you're not in a movie, you're in my world. I'm gonna make you wish you never stepped into my cage." In the locker room behind the stage, Keanu Reeves sat alone, hands resting on his knees, head bowed. He could hear every word Jackson barked through the walls. He felt no anger, only a quiet, steady calm. At 59, Keanu didn't look like the fighters on the posters. All swollen muscles and sharp edges, his hair was longer than it used to be, streaked with gray. Lines of age traced his eyes, but there was something deeper in his gaze. A patience, a kindness that time could not erase. A soft knock on the door broke his thoughts. It was his longtime friend and trainer, Mika, a woman who had trained alongside him when he prepared for his action movies. She looked at him with worry that she didn't bother to hide. That double quotes, "Keanu, you don't have to do this. You know he wants to humiliate you. He's not going to hold back." Keanu lifted his head, giving her that small, reassuring smile he always carried when the world seemed heavy. "Mika, I know. But this isn't about him. It's about the message, the charity. The people watching, they need to know it's never too late to stand up for something, even if you're scared, even if you're not ready. They need to see that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just steps forward quietly." She sighed, putting her hand on his shoulder. "Just promise me you'll protect yourself." Keanu stood, rolling his shoulders back, feeling the faint ache of old injuries and years of stunts and fights that had never been fake. He had trained for months for this night, not to win a title, but to prove something to himself, and maybe to the world. "I'll be fine. I just need to remind him, and everyone watching, that respect can't be bought or forced. It has to be earned." The moment Keanu stepped out of the tunnel into the roaring lights, a hush fell over a section of the crowd. People had come expecting a stunt, a bit of playful sparring, but now they could see it in his eyes. This wasn't an act. He was here to stand his ground, even if it meant being knocked down. Jackson sneered from the other side of the cage as Keanu climbed in. He leaned over the ropes, smirking. "Hey, old man, you forget your stunt doubles tonight?" Keanu just smiled gently, his eyes calm but steady. "No stunt double tonight. Just me." The bell rang. In that heartbeat, time seemed to slow. Jackson came at him fast, a blur of fists and taunts. Keanu moved carefully, blocking where he could, deflecting with a skill that didn't come from brute force, but from years of understanding movement. Flow, the dance of survival. Every time Jackson swung hard, Keanu absorbed it with a softness that frustrated the champ. The crowd gasped as Keanu slipped away from a brutal uppercut, countering with a quick jab that surprised Jackson more than it hurt him. It was like watching a quiet storm meet a raging fire, the calm refusing to be consumed. But the real tension wasn't in the punches. It was in the story unfolding in every glance, every breath. People began to lean forward in their seats. This wasn't about a win or loss anymore. It was about something deeper. A man who refused to bend to cruelty, who stood quietly in the storm to remind everyone watching that dignity doesn't shout. It endures. By the end of the first round, Jackson's confidence had begun to crack. His eyes darted at Keanu with something that almost looked like doubt. The bell rang, and the fighters went to their corners. Miko wiped sweat from Keanu's brow. He's rattled. Keep showing him you're not afraid. The people can see it. They're with you. Keanu nodded, feeling the pulse of the arena. The thousands of people who came for a spectacle, but were staying for something real. A glimpse of true resilience. Deep down, Jackson felt it too, though. He'd never admit it. In the second round, the world would see what happened when an arrogant champion faced a man who fought not with rage, but with unshakable humility. And that was only the beginning. The crowd was still buzzing when the bell rang for the second round. Jackson the Hammer Hayes wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his glove, glaring at Keanu like he was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Jackson had trained to crush fighters with speed, power, and fear, but none of that seemed to work here. Keanu didn't flinch when Jackson growled at him. He didn't crumble under the heavy punches. Instead, he moved like water, calm but impossible to hold down. Keanu stepped forward, his feet light on the mat. The lights glared down on them both, turning the cage into a stage. The world was watching, and Keanu knew it was more than just fists and kicks that people would remember tonight. It was how a man could stand his ground without losing his soul. Jackson lunged, throwing a vicious right hook that grazed Keanu's jaw. The sound echoed through the arena. Gasps rose from the crowd, but Keanu didn't go down. He stumbled back, his shoulder brushing the cage wall. Then he steadied himself. His eyes stayed locked on Jackson, clear and kind, which somehow made Jackson even angrier. "What's wrong with you?" Jackson spat, his breath heavy. "Fight back. Hit me. Show these people you're not just an old man in a costume." Keanu tilted his head slightly, as if considering it. He raised his gloves, again, breathing slow, grounded. "Sometimes it's not about hitting harder," he said, voice calm enough that Jackson almost missed the words. "It's about standing up longer." The next moment, Jackson charged, swinging wild. Keanu blocked the blows, using his arms like shields. Each hit stung through his bones, but he stayed focused. Jackson's fists were fast but sloppy, fueled by rage, not skill. Keanu waited for an opening. When Jackson overreached with a left swing, Keanu ducked under his arm and tapped him twice in the ribs. They weren't knockout punches, but they made Jackson flinch. Around the ring, people started to stand, leaning over the barricades. They came for a fight but stayed for the lesson unfolding before them. Some young fighters in the crowd exchanged glances. They knew what they were seeing. It was control, not chaos. It was humility, not ego. And it was winning them over. At ringside, Mika clenched her fists. She wanted to shout instructions, but she trusted Keanu's instincts more than her own. She knew what this was doing for the people who'd come for more than blood, the ones who'd come to feel hope. The second round stretched on, a strange dance of force and flow. Jackson landed some hard hits. Keanu absorbed them, breathing through the pain, turning each blow into a reminder that the body could break, but the spirit didn't have to. Every time he got hit, he rose back up like he'd never fallen. In a corner of the ring, Jackson's manager, a thick-necked man named Carl, was shouting at him between swings. "Finish him. What are you waiting for? Knock him out. Don't let him embarrass you." But Jackson was sweating more now. His muscles were burning. The confidence that had made him a star was slipping, replaced by something unfamiliar. Fear of losing to someone who wouldn't even play his game. Near the end of the round, Keanu did something nobody expected. When Jackson came at him with a brutal knee, Keanu blocked it and stepped in close. He didn't throw a punch. Instead, he grabbed Jackson's arm gently, locking their eyes together. "You're better than this," Keanu whispered. "You don't have to be angry to be strong." Jackson jerked back like he'd been stung. The bell rang, ending the round. The crowd was a wave of murmurs and cheers, trying to make sense of what they'd just seen. It wasn't a movie stunt. It wasn't fake. It was a real moment, one man reaching out to another in the middle of a cage built for violence. Back in his corner, Jackson sat breathing heavily, his chest heaving. He avoided Carl's eyes, his fists clenched around the ropes. Nobody had ever spoken to him like that. Not his trainers, not his family, not even himself. His whole life, he'd believed the only way to earn respect was to dominate, to crush everyone in front of him. But Keanu stood there, bruised and steady, and showed him something else, something stronger. In Keanu's corner, Mika pressed an ice pack to his jaw. She could see the darkening bruise where Jackson's punch had landed. "You're getting through to him," she said softly. Keanu winced at the cold but smiled. "It's not about him listening to me. It's about him hearing himself. Maybe tonight he will." The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, hyping the final round to come. But the real fight was already happening, not between fists, but inside Jackson's mind. The whole arena could feel it. They'd come for a spectacle. Now they were witnesses to something more rare. The quiet battle of a man facing his own reflection in the eyes of someone he couldn't break. And as the seconds ticked down to the next round, everyone knew this wouldn't end the way anyone expected, in this cage of roaring lights and thundering cheers. The true test was only just beginning. The air inside the arena felt thicker now. Like every breath the crowd took was tangled up in the tension between the two men standing under the lights. Jackson the Hammer Hayes was no longer bouncing with the cocky energy that had brought him into the cage. Instead, he paced in his corner like a caged animal that couldn't quite remember how to roar. Keanu sat on the low stool, calm and silent as Mika dabbed a cut near his eyebrow. His face was bruised, and his shoulder ached from blocking so many heavy shots, but his eyes stayed clear. There was no fear in them, just a quiet strength that seemed to reach out beyond the cage walls. The bell clanged for the third round. The crowd erupted. Jackson stepped forward, shoulders tense, fists up. But something was different now. His swagger was replaced by a question that kept echoing in his head. Why isn't this man breaking? Keanu circled slowly, his feet light, his hands ready but not aggressive. Jackson feinted a jab but didn't follow through. He was hesitating, searching Keanu's face for a sign, anger, fear, maybe even pride. But there was nothing to grab onto. Finally, Jackson threw a powerful right hook. It clipped Keanu's ribs, forcing a grunt out of him. The champion felt a flicker of relief. The power was still his. But when he stepped in to finish it with a brutal uppercut, Keanu leaned aside just enough. Jackson's fist sliced through empty air. He stumbled forward, off balance, and Keanu tapped him on the shoulder, almost like a father steadying a child. "Breathe," Keanu said, his voice low but clear over the roar of the crowd. The words cut deeper than any punch. Jackson backed away, glaring. "Stop talking to me like you know me," he snapped, sweat flying from his face. Keanu didn't move. He just watched him, chest rising and falling steadily. "I don't know you," he said, "but I see you." Jackson lunged again, driven by anger and something else, something he didn't want to name. Their gloves collided, fists meeting forearms and elbows, the smack of flesh echoing across the arena. For a few moments, it looked like the old Jackson was back, relentless, vicious. But under that storm, Keanu kept his center. The people watching could see it, too. Fans who'd come to cheer for a knockout now leaned forward, silent, feeling something they couldn't quite explain. There was a lesson happening in real time, that sometimes real strength was in not destroying what was in front of you. Suddenly, Jackson's knee came up fast. It hit Keanu's side, driving him to the mat for a split second. A wave of gasps swept the arena. Jackson stood over him, chest heaving, fists ready to drop the final hammer. But when Keanu looked up at him, there was no hatred in his eyes, only an invitation. An invitation to see himself. "Is this who you want to be?" Keanu asked, his voice steady, even as he knelt on the mat. Jackson's fists hovered in the air, trembling. The seconds stretched out like hours. Every camera in the building zoomed in. The crowd held its breath. Then, slowly, Jackson stepped back. He dropped his fists. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of all his victories, all his fame, and all His pride had come crashing down at once. The referee glanced at Jackson, confused. "Do you want to continue?" he asked. Jackson didn't answer right away. He turned away, fists resting on his hips, eyes flicking to his manager outside the cage. Carl was yelling, veins bulging in his neck, screaming for him to finish it. But Jackson's eyes moved past him, to the faces in the front row, young fighters, families, kids who were watching him not just as a fighter, but as a man. He looked back at Keanu, who was now standing again, breathing ragged but strong. Keanu stepped closer, close enough for only Jackson to hear. "We fight our whole lives for things that break us in the end," Keanu said. "You don't have to break tonight." Jackson's jaw twitched. He looked at the floor, then at his own fists. In that small space of silence, something shifted. A memory flickered through his mind. A boy in a small gym, fists wrapped with old tape, dreaming of glory because it was the only way to be seen. The boy was still there, hiding behind the hammer. The bell rang again, ending the round. The audience didn't cheer this time. They stayed silent, leaning into the tension of what was happening. The real fight wasn't just between two men anymore. It was between the life Jackson had lived and the man he could still become. As Jackson walked to his corner, his eyes lifted to the big screen above the cage. He saw himself next to Keanu, battered, bruised, but not broken. Something inside him whispered that maybe, just maybe, losing didn't have to mean failure. Maybe it could mean freedom. Mika looked at Keanu as she iced his shoulder again. "You think he's really listening?" she asked. Keanu winced but smiled faintly. "We're all listening to something. Sometimes it just takes longer to hear." The truth. Around the arena, people started to clap, not for the punches, but for the possibility that what they were watching might change more than just a fight. It might change a man. It might change them. And as the final round loomed, the question was no longer about who would win, but whether either man would ever be the same again. The arena lights glowed softer now, like the world itself was leaning in to listen. Even the roar of the crowd had turned into a low hum, thousands of people holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen when the bell rang again. The fight had stopped being about fists and belts and who was stronger. Now it was about whether a man could put his pride down long enough to pick himself up. In Jackson's corner, Carl barked orders, spitting words like venom. "You go back in there and finish him. Do you hear me? You think people respect a quitter? You think your sponsors want to see you hugging some old man in the cage? Crush him. You hear me? Crush him." Jackson didn't even look at him. His chest heaved, eyes fixed on the mat beneath his feet. Sweat dripped from his chin, dotting the canvas like fallen rain. In his head, he could still hear Keanu's voice echoing, "You don't have to break tonight." He remembered being 12 years old, lying awake in a small room while his parents screamed at each other down the hall. He'd made a promise to himself back then. He'd be so strong that nobody could ever hurt him. Nobody would ever talk down to him. Nobody would ever leave him behind. But standing in that cage, staring at the man who refused to break, he wondered if all that strength had just built taller walls around a lonely boy across the ring. Keanu rose from his stool. Every muscle in his body ached. His ribs throbbed where Jackson's knee had hit. The cut above his brow still leaked a trickle of blood that Mika wiped away with a clean cloth. But in his eyes, there was no defeat. There was only the same quiet, calm that had carried him through every storm of his life. "One more round," Mika whispered, squeezing his shoulder. "Whatever happens, you've already won." Keanu didn't answer. He just gave her that soft smile, the one that said he didn't need trophies or headlines, just the chance to stand up for what mattered. The bell clanged. The crowd rose to their feet. Jackson stepped forward, but slower this time. His fists were still up, but the fire in his eyes had cooled. Instead of charging, he circled Keanu, studying him like he was trying to read a page he'd skipped over his whole life. Keanu mirrored him, light on his feet despite the weight in his bones. They moved together in silence for a moment, the lights catching the sweat on their skin. Two men alone in a cage, but connected by something bigger than a fight. Jackson feinted a punch, then pulled back. He couldn't do it. He couldn't swing at the man who looked at him with no hate, No fear, no challenge, just respect. Hit me. Jackson muttered, almost pleading. Hit me so I can hate you. Keanu lowered his gloves a little, enough that Jackson could see his open hands. What if I don't? He asked softly. Jackson's chest rose and fell faster. Then what am I? If I don't win, what am I? Keanu took a step closer, so close Jackson could feel the warmth radiating off him. Maybe you're free, Keanu said. Maybe you're more than fists and belts. Maybe you're just you. The crowd watched, leaning in, some with tears in their eyes. They came for a brutal fight but stayed for a moment that felt like hope. Jackson's arms dropped to his sides. The hammer was gone. All that was left was a man young, angry, tired, and so desperately ready to stop swinging. Then something nobody expected happened. Jackson stepped in and wrapped his arms around Keanu's shoulders. Not a punch, a hug, raw, trembling, real. Keanu's arms folded around him, steady and forgiving, like an older brother who'd been waiting for him to come home. Gasps filled the arena, then cheers, not wild, bloodthirsty cheers, but soft claps that grew into a thunder of hands applauding, not violence, but a different kind of victory. Carl was screaming at the cage wall, red in the face, his voice lost beneath the roar. The referee hesitated, then stepped back, understanding what he was witnessing. Keanu leaned in, whispering just for Jackson, "It's not weakness to feel, Jackson, it's strength." Tears welled in Jackson's eyes, mixing with sweat. He buried his face in Keanu's shoulder, fists unclenched at last. In the stands, a boy who dreamed of being a fighter someday looked at his father and said, "He's not a loser, is he?" And the father shook his head, eyes glassy. "No, son, not at all." The final seconds of the round ticked away. The bell rang, but nobody moved to separate them. The fight was over. The real fight, the one inside Jackson's heart, had ended the moment he dropped his fists. In that cage, under the bright lights and roaring crowd, two men stood together, proof that sometimes the greatest win is not in breaking your opponent, but in refusing to break yourself. And the people watching would carry that image home in their hearts. The day the hammer put down his rage, and a quiet man reminded the world that real strength lives in kindness. When the bell rang to end the fourth round, it should have been chaos. It should have been about who won, who lost, who would get their hand raised for the cameras. But as Jackson and Keanu stood there in the middle of the cage, the world outside the ropes seemed to blur away. The lights above them felt softer somehow, like they'd shifted from spotlights to a warm glow meant for something sacred. The referee stepped closer, glancing at both men like he didn't know what to do. Technically, the fight should go to the judges, but nobody in the arena cared about the scorecards anymore. The fans, who had once screamed for blood, were now silent, holding their breath as they watched two fighters stand shoulder to shoulder, no fists raised, no eyes burning with hate. Keanu leaned back just enough to look Jackson in the eyes. His voice was gentle but strong. "You did good," he said, and there was no pity in his tone, only truth. "You showed them something real tonight." Jackson's face was wet with sweat and tears. He looked at the canvas, then back at Keanu, almost like he was seeing him for the first time. Not as an enemy, not as some actor playing tough, but as a man who'd given him permission to be more than the hammer. Around the cage, people started clapping, slow at first, scattered, then growing into a wave of applause that wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Even the camera crews, who'd come to catch knockout punches and broken teeth, were now focused on the raw human moment happening in the center of the cage. In Jackson's corner, Carl was still fuming. He pounded the cage wall with his fist, shouting about contracts and sponsors, but nobody was listening anymore. The world had shifted, and there was no space left for his poison in this moment of grace. Mika climbed up the steps and stepped through the cage door. She went straight to Keanu, putting her hand on his shoulder, her eyes soft but filled with pride. "You all right?" she asked. Keanu let out a long breath, feeling the ache in his ribs, the sting of the cut above his brow, the dull throb in his shoulder, reminders of every hit he'd taken and every hit he'd refused to give back. But under all that pain was something deeper, a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm all right," he said, giving her that quiet smile that had always made people feel like things might be okay, even when the world was on fire. Mika looked at Jackson, her expression shifting to something like compassion. "And you?" she asked him. Jackson nodded, wiping his face with the back of his glove. He looked so different now, no longer the hammer, no longer the unbeatable champion with the sneer and the swagger, just a young man who finally saw that there was more to life than being feared. "I think I will be," Jackson said, his voice rough but honest. Thanks to him, the announcer finally stepped into the cage, microphone in hand, trying to salvage the show for the people watching at home. His voice cracked through the speakers, but the usual hype was gone, replaced by something softer. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's match ends not in a knockout, not in a tap-out, but in a reminder that sometimes the hardest fights are the ones we fight inside ourselves. Let's hear it for both these men." The crowd roared, but it wasn't the roar of bloodlust. It was the roar of respect, of gratitude, of hope. Families in the stands hugged each other. Young fighters leaned over the barricades, their eyes wide, seeing what real strength looked like. Not just fists, but forgiveness. Jackson turned to Keanu, and for a moment, the noise of the arena faded again. "What happens now?" he asked, like a boy at the edge of something bigger than he'd ever known. Keanu clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Now you figure out who you really are," he said, "and you make sure nobody ever tells you you're only worth what you can break." It was simple. It was everything. Backstage, the press waited to swarm them with questions about what it meant, whether it was planned, what message they were trying to send. But Keanu didn't care about headlines. He cared about the young kids watching at home, the ones who needed to see that it's okay to put your fists down, that it's okay to walk away from what breaks you, even if everyone around you says you're weak for doing it. As they stepped out of the cage together, side by side, Mika at Keanu's shoulder and Jackson just behind them, the crowd kept clapping. It felt like an echo that would follow them far beyond the arena walls, a reminder that the real fight is never about the belt or the check. It's about the man you choose to be when the lights go out. And deep down, Keanu knew this wasn't the end of Jackson's story, or his. The real work would begin when the cameras turned away and the world moved on. That's when strength would matter most. And Keanu, bruised and battered, was ready for that fight. The night air outside the arena felt different, almost soft, against the bruises that marked Keanu's skin like old memories. He stepped through the back doors with Mika at his side, Jackson trailing just a few steps behind. The roar of the crowd still echoed inside, muffled by the thick concrete walls. But out here there was only silence and the slow hum of city lights waking up the night. Jackson carried his duffel bag over his shoulder, head lowered but eyes clearer than they'd been in years. The young fighters waiting outside, hoping for a glimpse of the champion, watched him with wide eyes. But what they saw now wasn't the hammer. It was a man stripped of armor, standing in the rawness of his own truth. Keanu stopped near the curb where a black van waited for him and Mika. He turned back, studying Jackson's face in the dim glow of the parking lot lights. He could see the storm still churning under the young man's ribs, but there was hope in it now. A chance to rebuild. "You sure you don't want to ride?" Keanu asked, nodding to the empty seat beside him. Jackson shook his head. His lips twitched into a crooked, tired smile. "Nah, I need to walk. Think I need to feel what it's like to stand on my own. To feet for a while." Keanu nodded, respecting it. Sometimes the longest walk you ever take is the first one you make for yourself. Mika climbed into the van, but Keanu lingered, reaching out to squeeze Jackson's shoulder one last time. "It's gonna be hard," he said, his voice soft but steady. "People will try to drag you back to what you were, remind you you're not just fists." Jackson's eyes glistened under the street lamps. "What if I fail? What if I slip back?" Keanu leaned in, their foreheads almost touching. "Then you stand up again. You don't have to be perfect, Jackson. You just have to keep standing." The words sank in deeper than any punch. Jackson pulled him into a hug, tight and real, the kind of hug that said thank you without needing the words. When they pulled apart, Jackson looked around at the young fighters who had gathered by the fences. For the first time in his career, he walked over without the swagger, without the fake grin. He dropped his bag at his feet and sank down to sit cross-legged on the cold pavement, inviting them to come closer. "Anyone got questions?" he asked. Tonight wasn't about winning, it was about learning. So let's learn together. Somewhere behind him, Carl the manager stormed out the back doors, phone glued to his ear, barking threats about ruined deals and lost money. Jackson didn't even turn his head. For the first time, Carl's voice was just noise, and Jackson felt free. Keanu watched it all from the van window as they pulled away. Mika glanced at him, a small, tired grin on her face. "You ever think you'd change a champion's mind in the middle of a cage?" she asked. Keanu chuckled under his breath, feeling every bruise, every ache in his bones. "Wasn't about changing him," he said. "Was about reminding him who he was before the world told him he had to be the hammer." Mika nodded, looking out at the city lights slipping by. "And what about you? Who are you now?" Keanu leaned back, letting the hum of the road lull him into a gentle calm. He thought about every young kid who might see that fight online tomorrow, about the angry boys who'd think twice before swinging at the world, about the quiet ones who'd learn that standing tall doesn't always mean standing loud. "I'm just someone who doesn't swing first anymore," he said. "Someone who knows you can't knock kindness out of a man who doesn't let it go." Mika squeezed his hand, and for a moment the world outside felt still. They didn't need crowds or cameras anymore. The real work would happen in the small moments, the conversations, the second chances, the days when standing up felt harder than falling down. And somewhere behind them, in a dim parking lot under buzzing lights, a young man once known as the Hammer sat cross-legged among kids who wanted to be just like him. And for the first time, he was showing them a different way. The night rolled on, but the story wouldn't fade. It would live on in every bruise that healed, every fist unclenched, every heart that learned you don't have to break others to prove you're unbreakable. Keanu closed his eyes, resting against the window, the soft smile still on his face. And somewhere, quietly, a new fight began, the one that would last long after the cage doors closed.